He's just a lucky black man who managed to infiltrate our family, my mother-in-law whispered to my sister-in-law, thinking I couldn't hear. They were only 2 meters away from me, in the elegant garden of the mansion where my brother-in-law Michael's wedding was taking place. I pretended to adjust my tie while catching every poisonous word that came out of Martha's mouth, a woman who for 5 years had called me dear to my face. Now that you've got what you wanted, you can't stop showing off about that new job, she continued, venom dripping from every syllable. As if it were some kind of real achievement. My wife Rebecca was standing next to me, arranging the bridesmaids' bouquets. She heard everything. I know she heard because I saw her shoulders stiffen for a split second before she pretended to be completely absorbed in the flowers. My name is James, I'm 34 years old, and I just found out that my wife of 5 years is a coward. No, worse than that. She's an accomplice. For years I attributed her family's subtle comments to my sensitive temperament. The jokes about my luck in getting promotions. The strange looks when I mentioned achievements at work. The conversations that stopped abruptly when I arrived. Rebecca must regret marrying so quickly, Martha continued, now with an almost motherly tone of false concern. She was so young, she didn't know what she was doing. It was at that moment that my wife did something that broke me inside. She smiled. It wasn't a nervous or uncomfortable smile. It was a smile of agreement. Subtle, but unmistakable. 5 years of marriage. 5 years of pretending I was being paranoid. 5 years of listening to Rebecca tell me I was overreacting whenever I mentioned some strange comment from the family. And now I knew the truth. Not only did she know about the family's racism, she agreed with it. What they didn't know was that I had learned a lot about patience and strategy since I started working as a corporate lawyer. And in the last 6 months, since I was promoted to junior partner, I had developed a very specific skill, documenting everything. Every questionable text message. Every innocent comment. Every look of contempt. I had an entire file on my wife's family. As Martha and my sister-in-law continued their venomous conversation, I discreetly activated the recorder on my cell phone. It wouldn't be the first time I needed evidence of their true opinions. The problem is that now he's going to want to have children, Martha sighed. Just imagine grandchildren with that mix. Rebecca didn't say a word in my defense. Instead, she muttered something about understanding her mother's concern. That's when I realized that this wouldn't just be a painful revelation about my in-laws. It would be the catalyst for something much bigger. Because what none of them knew was that I wasn't just a lucky black man who had infiltrated the family. I was a man who had spent years observing, learning, and documenting. And now I had enough information to show them what it really means to be systematic. If you're wondering how this story of hypocrisy and revelation might end, subscribe to the channel because what happens next will show you that underestimating someone can be the biggest mistake of your life. As they continued to talk about my place in the family, I was already mentally organizing my response. A response they would never forget. And look at how he dresses now, Martha continued, her voice laden with barely concealed disdain. Expensive suits, designer watches, as if you could buy class. I continued to pretend to adjust my tie while watching my wife. Rebecca was now arranging the flowers with mechanical movements, but I could see the tension in her shoulders. She knew I was close enough to hear. "Mom, maybe we should," Rebecca began timidly. "No, dear. Someone has to tell the truth," Martha cut her off. "You were so young when you fell in love. You couldn't see past those pretty eyes and that fake charm." Fake. The word echoed in my mind like a gunshot. 5 years of marriage, I had attributed comments like these to what I thought was Martha's protective nature. When she questioned my promotions, I thought she was being cautious. When she made jokes about my luck, I interpreted it as innocent envy. But now, listening to this conversation they thought was private, all the pieces fell into place with brutal clarity. "Remember when he brought those friends of his to Christmas dinner last year?" Martha whispered with disgust. "Noisy, uneducated. It's the kind of environment he grew up in." My noisy friends were 2 fellow Harvard lawyers and a neurosurgeon. But I knew the problem wasn't the volume of their voices or their manners. It was the color of their skin. "At least now he has a decent job," Rebecca murmured, and for a moment I thought she was going to defend me. But I agree that sometimes it's awkward when he acts like he's equal to the other partners. As if he were equal. 5 years. 5 years sleeping next to a woman who secretly believed I should be grateful to be tolerated in spaces she considered naturally hers. What worries me most, Martha continued, lowering her voice even further, is that now he'll want to have children. And you know how those children can turn out problematic. Rebecca didn't answer, but I saw her bite her lower lip. It was a nervous tic I knew well. She did that when she was considering something she knew was wrong but secretly agreed with. At that moment, I realized my marriage had been a lie from day one. Rebecca never loved me. She was enchanted by the idea of being progressive, of dating a successful black man. I was her trophy of racial tolerance, her proof of open-mindedness to her liberal friends. But when the doors closed and she was with her real family, I became a source of shame and apologies. Remember when he got that big promotion in March? Martha asked. I bet it was because of quotas. They always promote the, to meet diversity goals. My promotion to junior partner wasn't because of quotas. I had worked 80 hours a week for 2 years, won the most complex case in the firm's history, and brought in 3 new millionaire clients. But to them, my success could only be explained by the color of my skin. James is smart, Mom, Rebecca finally said, but her voice lacked conviction. He really works hard. Smart by his standards, Martha corrected with a condescending tone. But let's be honest, Rebecca. He'll never really be accepted in the circles that matter. And neither will you, as long as you're married to him. That's when Rebecca did something that broke me completely. She sighed. It wasn't a sigh of indignation or disagreement. It was a sigh of resignation. As if she had finally heard aloud something she had been thinking for years. Maybe you're right, Rebecca murmured. Sometimes I wonder what it would be like if I had made different choices. My hand trembled slightly as I held the phone. The recorder was still running, capturing every poisonous word. But now I was no longer just documenting casual family racism. I was documenting my wife's confession that our entire marriage had been a mistake she secretly regretted. Honey, you're still young, Martha said with false sympathy. You still have time to correct this mistake. You don't have to sacrifice yourself forever for an impulsive decision. But what about divorce? Rebecca asked, her voice now more interested than reluctant. He's a lawyer. He knows all the tricks. There are ways, Martha replied mysteriously. Ways to make life difficult for people like him. People like him. At that moment, I realized that this went far beyond passive family racism. Martha was actively conspiring to sabotage my life, and Rebecca was considering participating. For months, I had noticed strange little things. Important documents disappearing from my home office. Clients canceling meetings at the last minute with no clear explanation. Vague rumors about my competence circulating around the office. I had chalked it all up to paranoia. But now I realized it had been a systematic, coordinated campaign. I have some contacts in his office, Martha continued. People who understand the situation. It wouldn't be difficult to plant some doubts about his professional ethics. Professional ethics. They were planning to destroy my career. What about financially? Rebecca asked. If we get divorced. I've already talked to our lawyer about that too. There are ways to protect your assets. Especially if there are questions about the source of his. The source of my assets. As if a black man could only have money through illicit means. I kept listening, my anger turning into something colder and more calculated. Every word they said was being recorded. Every conspiratorial plan was being documented. But what they didn't know was that I wasn't just a successful corporate lawyer. I was a corporate lawyer specializing in discrimination and defamation cases. Over the past 6 years, I had destroyed the entire careers of people who underestimated the power of proper documentation. And over the past 6 months, since I first became suspicious of Rebecca's family's behavior, I had documented everything. Every suspicious email. Every strange phone call. Every convenient coincidence that damaged my reputation or career. I had a digital file of over 200 pages on my wife's family. Dates, times, witnesses, photographic evidence, and now audio recordings. The important thing is to move slowly, Martha advised. We don't want him to suspect anything until it's too late. Too late. They had no idea how late it already was. For them. As they continued to conspire against me, I mentally organized my strategy. It would not be an emotional or impulsive reaction. It would be a precise, surgical, and devastatingly effective legal and social campaign. Because what Martha and Rebecca didn't understand was that underestimating a successful black man wasn't just racism. It was a fatal tactical error. James. Rebecca's voice startled me. She was walking toward me with a forced smile. Honey, I've been looking for you. Come on, I want to introduce you to some cousins. I discreetly turned off the recorder and put my phone away. It was time to begin the next phase. Sure, honey, I replied with my best interpretation of an obedient and oblivious husband. I'd love to meet them. But as I walked alongside the woman I once loved, one question echoed in my mind. How far were they willing to go to destroy me? And more importantly, were they prepared for the consequences when they found out I knew everything? James, these are my cousins Bradley and Harrison, Rebecca said in that artificially cheerful tone I had learned to recognize. They were eager to meet the famous lawyer husband. Bradley, a burly man in his 40s, greeted me with an overly firm handshake, the kind of grip some white men use as a test of dominance. Harrison, younger and thinner, simply waved from a distance, keeping his hands in his pockets. So you're the guy who got promoted at Morrison and Associates, Bradley said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Must be interesting working there. I hear they're very progressive these days. The word progressive came out of his mouth as if it were something disgusting. James is very talented, Rebecca quickly interjected, but her voice lacked the genuine conviction I would expect from a proud wife. I'm sure, Harrison finally said. Especially considering the opportunities available these days. Opportunities. Another euphemism for racial quotas. For the next 20 minutes, they bombarded me with seemingly innocent questions that revealed their true opinions. Questions about how I really got my clients. Comments about how lucky I was to find such an understanding family. Jokes about how I must be feeling right at home with all the diversity in the office. Rebecca remained by my side throughout the conversation, occasionally giggling nervously or changing the subject when the comments became particularly obvious. But never, not once, did she defend me. Did you guys know that James grew up in Detroit? Rebecca said at one point, as if offering an explanation for my behavior. Detroit. As if my hometown was an excuse for any social awkwardness they perceived in me. Oh, that explains a lot, Bradley laughed. It must have been interesting growing up there. That's when I realized Rebecca wasn't just being silent. She was actively participating in my humiliation, providing ammunition for them. After we walked away from the cousins, Rebecca turned to me with that forced smile again. They're a little direct, she said, as if that were an excuse. But they have good hearts. Good hearts. As if racism could be forgiven by good hearts. Direct how? I asked, testing to see if she would admit what we had just experienced. You know, conservative. Traditional. Sometimes they speak without thinking. Traditional. Another euphemism. For the rest of the reception, I watched. I really watched. Every interaction, every glance, every pause in conversation when I approached. I counted at least a dozen subtly racist comments directed at me in one afternoon. Comments about my urban energy, my unique perspective, my natural ability to adapt. And Rebecca? She smiled through them all. Around 5 in the afternoon, as we were getting ready to leave, I witnessed the final conversation that sealed my fate. Rebecca was talking to her Aunt Helen near the bathroom. They thought I was in the car, but I had gone back to get my coat. How do you stand it? Helen asked quietly. It's difficult at times, Rebecca admitted. Especially when he acts like he's just like everyone else. Like when he insists on using the family golf club or when he talks about politics at dinner. Honey, you're still very young, Helen said with false sympathy. You don't have to sacrifice yourself forever for an impulsive decision. I know, Auntie. Sometimes I think about it. But it's complicated now. He knows all our family secrets. He knows about Dad's investments, about the company's tax situation. It would be problematic if we separated on hostile terms. Family secrets. Investments. Tax situation. At that moment, I realized that my marriage had not been just a misguided romantic fantasy on Rebecca's part. It had been strategic from the start. She kept me around not out of love, but because I knew too much about the family's questionable business practices. Practices that, as a corporate lawyer, I had helped to legally structure in the early years of our marriage. Maybe it's time to find a way to limit what he knows, Helen suggested carefully. I've thought about it. Mama has some ideas. Mama. Martha. The same woman who had conspired to sabotage my career. I left the reception that night with brutal clarity about my situation. I wasn't just an unwanted husband in a racially problematic marriage. I was a legal liability that needed to be managed or eliminated. In the car, Rebecca attempted small talk about the party. The cousins liked you, she lied. Bradley said you seem very intelligent. Intelligent for a black man. She didn't need to finish the sentence. That's nice, I replied, keeping my voice neutral as I mentally planned my next steps. Because now I had a timeline. I could no longer afford to passively collect evidence or slowly build a case. They were actively planning to neutralize me, and I needed to act first. That night, after Rebecca fell asleep, I opened my laptop and got to work. Not just organizing the evidence I already had, but accessing resources that a racist middle-class family would never imagine I possessed. Contacts in private investigation that I had developed through corporate cases. Financial crime experts who owed me favors. Investigative journalists who had been looking for stories about discrimination in influential families for years. But more importantly, I had complete access to the family's financial records. Not just as a son-in-law, but as the lawyer who had structured many of their operations. Operations that, under proper scrutiny, would reveal enough tax evasion, money laundering, and investment fraud to destroy not only Martha, but the entire financial family tree. By 3 a.m, I had created a file of over 300 pages. Evidence of documented racial discrimination. Recordings of conspiracies to sabotage my career. And complete details of decades of family financial crimes. But there was still one piece of the puzzle missing. Something Martha had mentioned about contacts in my office. Someone at Morrison & Associates was working with them. Someone was leaking information about my cases, sabotaging my reputation, and setting the stage for my eventual downfall. And I needed to find out who it was before they found out I knew everything. While Rebecca slept peacefully beside me, I finalized my file and began drafting the first emails that would change everything. Emails to private investigators. Emails to journalists. And a very special email to the compliance director at Morrison & Associates about possible ethical violations involving client insider information. What Martha and Rebecca didn't understand was that they weren't just messing with an unwanted black husband. They were messing with a lawyer who specialized in destroying people who thought they were above the law. And in a few hours, when my plan began to unfold, they would discover that underestimating someone based on the color of their skin wasn't just morally repugnant. It was a tactical error that would destroy everything they had worked for over generations. The war had begun. They just didn't know it yet. By the next morning, my first email had already generated results. David Chun, a private investigator I had helped with a corporate fraud case 2 years earlier, responded in less than an hour. James, I got your message. Interesting timing. I just wrapped up another case and have resources available. From the details you mentioned, this seems to be broader than casual family discrimination. I can start today. David wasn't just any investigator. He was a former FBI agent specializing in white-collar crime who had developed a network of contacts that included investigative journalists, tax auditors, and even federal prosecutors. At 8 a.m, while Rebecca was eating breakfast and reading emails on her phone, I was in my home office organizing the first phase of the operation. "Honey, you seem tense today," Rebecca commented, looking over her shoulder at her phone. "Everything okay at work?" "Just a few complicated cases," I replied, keeping my voice casual as I saved an encrypted file with all the recordings of her family. What she didn't know was that I had spent the entire night not only organizing evidence, but uncovering information that turned our marital problem into a potential federal scandal. The family's investments, which I had helped structure years earlier, included several transactions that now, under proper scrutiny, revealed suspicious patterns of tax evasion and money laundering. Martha wasn't just a racist mother-in-law. She was the matriarch of a sophisticated financial operation that had evaded millions in taxes over the past decade. Around 10 a.m, I received a call that would change everything. "Mr. Williams, this is Patricia Rodriguez from the U.S. Attorney's Office. I received your communication regarding possible compliance violations at Morrison and Associates. We would like to speak with you. My heart raced. I had sent the email to compliance in hopes of finding out who was leaking information. I never expected it to reach the federal level. When would be convenient? I asked, already knowing that I had crossed a line of no return. This afternoon, if possible. And Mr. Williams, bring all the documentation you mentioned. At 2 in the afternoon, I was sitting in a stark conference room in the federal building, facing 3 prosecutors and 2 FBI agents. My files were spread out on the table like evidence of a crime. Mr. Williams, said Prosecutor Rodriguez, what you brought us is not just evidence of racial discrimination. It is documentation of a tax evasion scheme that we have been investigating for 2 years. What do you mean? I asked, even though part of me already knew the answer. Your in-laws, particularly Martha Henderson, are at the center of an operation that moves funds through shell companies to avoid federal taxes. The transactions you legally structured were used to mask subsequent illegal activities. They showed me charts, flowcharts, and bank records that painted a devastating picture. Martha hadn't just orchestrated a campaign to racially humiliate me, she had used my legal expertise to build the infrastructure for her financial crimes. We need your full cooperation, Agent Morrison said. As the attorney who structured the original transactions, you have privileged access that can help us close this case. Cooperation. They were asking me to become a federal informant against my own political family. What would my legal status be? I asked, my lawyer's mind automatically assessing risks. You will be considered a cooperating witness, not a target of the investigation. Your actions were legal at the time. The subsequent illegal use of that structure is not your responsibility. I signed the cooperation agreement that same afternoon. As I drove home, my cell phone rang. It was Martha. James dear, her voice carried that fake motherly tone I now recognized as manipulation. We're organizing a special dinner this weekend. A small family gathering to discuss some changes in the family investments. Changes in investments. They were moving money around. Of course, Martha. Rebecca and I would love to attend. Great. And James, it might be best not to mention this at your office. You know how lawyers can be curious about family business. She was trying to silence me preemptively, which meant they knew I had access to information that was dangerous to them. That evening, Rebecca was unusually affectionate. She cooked my favorite meal, opened a bottle of expensive wine, and even suggested we watch a movie together. You know I love you, right? She said, snuggling up against my shoulder as we pretended to watch a silly romance on television. Of course, honey. I love you too. We lied to each other with practiced ease. But while she slept peacefully beside me, I was in the bathroom sending encrypted messages to David Chen and Prosecutor Rodriguez. They're moving assets. Family dinner on Saturday may be to finalize transfers before something comes to light. Rodriguez's reply came within minutes. Perfect. We'll install monitoring equipment. Are you willing to wear a wire? Willing. As if I had a choice at this point. On Thursday, David Chen sent me his first preliminary report. It was a masterpiece of investigation that revealed not only the extent of the family's financial crimes, but also the extent of their campaign of sabotage against me. They had indeed infiltrated my firm. Bradley, the burly cousin who had interrogated me at the wedding, worked as an investment advisor to several clients of Morrison and Associates. He had spent the last 6 months casting doubt on my ethical competence and suggesting that I might be involved in questionable activities. Even more devastating, Rebecca wasn't just a passive accomplice. She had actively provided information about my cases and clients to the family, violating attorney-client privilege that could cause me serious ethical problems. My wife wasn't just racist. She was a corporate spy. On Friday night, as Rebecca got ready for the next day's family dinner, I was finalizing the last details of the federal operation that would destroy them all. You seem different this week, Rebecca commented, applying lipstick in front of the mirror. More confident. Just feeling more secure about our future, I replied, adjusting the tie that would hide the federal microphone. Our future. She smiled, but there was something forced about her expression. James, after dinner tomorrow. I think we need to talk about some things. Talk about some things. The evasive language people use when they're about to end relationships. Sure, honey. I can't wait. As she finished getting ready, I received one last message from Prosecutor Rodriguez. Team in position. Recording authorized. Search warrant will be executed Monday morning. If you are following this journey of revelation and justice, subscribe to the channel because the operation that takes place in the next block will show that underestimating someone can be the most expensive mistake of your life. I looked at my reflection in the mirror. The man staring back at me was no longer the naive husband who had been humiliated at a wedding weeks earlier. He was a federal informant prepared to systematically destroy a criminal network that had used racial discrimination as a smokescreen for financial crimes. Saturday's dinner would be the last family event they would ever host as free people. And Rebecca? My dear wife who had spent years betraying me professionally and personally? She would discover that she had married the wrong man to betray. Because while she slept beside me, planning our separation, I was documenting evidence that would make her a federal accomplice to crimes that could result in decades in prison. The war was over before they even realized it had begun. And I had won. Saturday's dinner began exactly as I had predicted. Martha greeted Rebecca and me with her fake motherly smile, while Bradley and Harrison were already seated at the elegant dinner table, feigning casual interest in business conversation. "James dear," Martha said, pouring wine into crystal glasses, "I'm so glad you could come. We have some important family changes to discuss." The federal recorder under my shirt picked up every word with crystal clarity. For the first 20 minutes, they kept up the charade. Polite conversation about the weather, superficial comments about work, seemingly innocent questions about my new clients at the firm. But I could feel the tension building. They were waiting for the right moment to implement whatever their final plan was. "Well," Martha finally said, dabbing her mouth delicately with a linen napkin, "now that we've finished our meal, perhaps it's time to discuss more serious matters." Bradley sat up straighter in his chair. Harrison put his phone on silent. Rebecca avoided my gaze completely. "James, we have some concerns about conflicts of interest," Martha began, her voice taking on a more formal legal tone. "Questions about confidential family information that may be misused." Misused. They were accusing me of using privileged family information for personal gain. "How so?" I asked, keeping my expression neutral while mentally calculating how many federal laws they were about to break. "Well," Bradley interjected, "we have evidence that you may have shared information about our family investments with third parties." Evidence. They had fabricated evidence against me. "And," Harrison added, "there are also questions about your ethical conduct at the firm. Some clients have reported irregularities." Irregularities. They had spread lies about my professional competence to set the stage for my destruction. "What exactly are you suggesting?" I asked, feigning confusion. Martha smiled, and for the first time, it was a genuine smile. A smile of a predator who had finally cornered her prey. "We're suggesting, James, that it might be time for you to find a new career. Away from law. Away from this city. Away from this family." Rebecca finally spoke, her voice low but firm. "It's for the best, James. For all of us." It was at that moment that I realized this wasn't just a plan to humiliate or sabotage me. It was a plan to destroy me completely, professionally, financially, and socially. "What if I refuse?" I asked. "Well," Martha said, opening a folder that was next to her chair, "I'm sure the ethics committee at Morrison & Associates would be very interested in these photographs of you meeting secretly with clients outside the office." She spread several photographs on the table. They were photos of me having lunch with clients, but taken from angles that made them look suspicious, as if they were illicit clandestine meetings. "And these recorded conversations where you discuss confidential family information," Bradley added, placing a small digital recorder on the table. "They had recorded me. Or rather, they had edited recordings to make it look like I was violating attorney-client confidentiality." "And finally," Harrison said, producing bank documents, "these suspicious transfers to offshore accounts that appear to be linked to your clients." Offshore accounts. They had created fake accounts in my name to simulate money laundering. The trap was sophisticated, well-planned, and potentially devastating. For years, they had not only tolerated me with racial reluctance, they had studied me, documented my habits, created false evidence, and built a case that could destroy me professionally and potentially land me in prison. "Impressive," I finally said, examining the fake documents. "You really thought of everything." We pride ourselves on being thorough, Martha replied with obvious satisfaction. So what exactly is the proposal? I asked. You quietly resign from the firm, Bradley explained. You voluntarily surrender your law license. Leave town. And in return, this evidence never reaches the relevant authorities. What about my marriage? I asked, looking directly at Rebecca. Rebecca has already consulted a divorce lawyer, Martha said coldly. She will keep the house, the investments, and her reputation. You get to keep your dignity intact. Dignity intact. As if being racially blackmailed was a way to preserve dignity. Are you sure you want to do this? I asked one last time. Absolutely, Martha replied. Unless you'd rather have this evidence reach the FBI on Monday morning. The FBI. They had specifically mentioned the FBI. That's when I started laughing. Not a nervous or hysterical laugh. A genuine, deep, amused laugh. They looked at each other, confused. Something amuse you, James? Martha asked, her confidence beginning to waver. You mentioned the FBI, I said, still laughing. It's interesting because... I got up from my chair and walked over to the window, my laughter turning into a cold smile. Because I spent Friday afternoon talking to the FBI about you. The silence in the room was instant and absolute. In fact, I continued, turning to face the 4 people who had conspired to destroy me, they were fascinated by the evidence I provided about tax evasion, money laundering, and investment fraud involving the Henderson family. Martha turned pale. Bradley choked on his wine. Harrison dropped his phone on the floor. Rebecca looked at me with growing horror. You see, I explained calmly, while you were busy plotting my destruction based on racism and arrogance, I was documenting decades of actual financial crimes. I took my phone out of my pocket and showed them the screen. I was recording our conversation in real time. And this conversation, where you just confessed to blackmail, extortion, and fabrication of evidence. I smiled. This recording is being transmitted directly to federal agents who are stationed 3 blocks from here. That's impossible, Martha stammered. Martha, I said, my voice now carrying all the authority of someone who had spent years being underestimated and humiliated, you made 2 fundamental mistakes. I sat back down, now clearly in control of the situation. First, you assumed that a successful black man could only be successful through luck or quotas. You never considered that I might be genuinely smarter, better prepared, and more strategic than you. I looked directly at Rebecca. And second, you used my own legal expertise to build the infrastructure for your financial crimes. I don't just know where all the bodies are buried, I helped dig some of the holes. That's when we heard the sound of cars approaching the driveway. Ah, I said, checking my watch, and they arrived right on time. There was a knock on the door. Loud. Official. FBI. Search warrant. Martha jumped up from her chair so quickly that she knocked over her glass of wine. Bradley tried to reach for the fake documents they had prepared against me, but I had already photographed them as evidence of their blackmail attempts. James, Rebecca whispered, tears beginning to form in her eyes, you can't do this. We're family. I looked at the woman I had been married to for 5 years. The woman who had pretended to love me while secretly agreeing that I was inferior because of my race. The woman who had conspired to destroy me professionally and personally. Rebecca, I said softly, family doesn't try to destroy family. You treated me like an enemy for years. Now you're simply facing the consequences. Federal agents entered the room, badges in hand. Mr. James Williams? One of them asked. Yes. Thank you for your cooperation. We have search and seizure warrants for this residence and for Martha Henderson, Bradley Henderson, and Harrison Chun. As the agents began reading Miranda rights to my in-laws, Martha stared at me with pure hatred. How could you do this? She spat. After everything we've done for you. Everything they've done for me. Years of racial humiliation disguised as generosity. Martha, I replied calmly, you haven't done anything for me. You tolerated me because you needed my legal expertise for your financial schemes. And when you decided you no longer needed me, you tried to destroy me. I looked around the room, at the people who had spent years making me question my own sanity, making me doubt whether the racism I perceived was real. The difference between us is simple, I sought justice. You sought destruction. As they were led away in handcuffs, Rebecca looked at me one last time. "I really loved you," she whispered. "No," I replied. "You loved the idea of being progressive. I was just the accessory." The house was empty except for me and the agents who were still collecting evidence. I walked out the front door and stood on the porch, breathing in the night air. Prosecutor Rodriguez was waiting by a federal car. "How do you feel?" she asked. It was a complex question. After years of being systematically humiliated and sabotaged, after discovering that my own marriage had been a lie, after seeing people I considered family taken away in handcuffs. How did I feel? "Free," I finally replied. But as I drove home that night, I knew that true freedom was yet to come. Because what Martha, Rebecca, and the others never understood was that underestimating someone based on the color of their skin didn't just destroy their lives. It destroyed their own perception of reality. And some lessons, once learned, can never be unlearned. 6 months later, I was sitting on the porch of my new home in Austin, reading the latest news about the case on my tablet. "Former investment executives convicted in federal tax evasion scheme," was the headline in the Dallas Morning News. Martha had received 8 years in federal prison. Bradley and Harrison, 5 years each. Rebecca, as a minor cooperator, received 3 years of probation and a $2 million fine. $2 million she didn't have, since all of the family's assets had been seized. The irony did not escape me. The woman who had conspired to destroy me financially was now working as a cashier at a supermarket, living in a friend's apartment. My phone rang. It was Prosecutor Rodriguez. "James, we just received the latest confession. Martha has revealed 3 more schemes involving influential Dallas families. Her testimony has led to the largest investigation of racially motivated financial crimes I've ever seen." "What about Rebecca?" I asked, though I wasn't sure why I still cared. "She is strictly adhering to the terms of her probation. She's working, attending mandatory meetings, staying away from any questionable financial activity." After hanging up, I reflected on the past few months. The federal operation hadn't just destroyed one racist family. It had exposed an entire network of systemic discrimination disguised as family traditions and conservative values. 12 different families were investigated. 23 people faced federal charges. Hundreds of millions of dollars in tax schemes were uncovered. All because one arrogant family decided that a successful black man could only be the result of luck. 3 days later, I received a letter. The return address was the federal prison where Martha was serving her sentence. "James, I know I don't deserve your time or consideration, but I need to say something. You were right about us. Not just about the financial crimes, but about who we really were as people. Here in prison, I've had time to think. To really think. About how I treated you. About the things I said. About how I taught my family to see you as inferior. You were never inferior. You were always smarter, more ethical, and stronger than any of us. Racism blinded us to your true nature, and our arrogance convinced us that we could manipulate someone who was, in every way, better than us. I don't expect forgiveness. I just hope you know that some of us have learned our lesson, even if it was too late." I folded the letter and put it away. It wasn't an apology that would change anything, but it was acknowledgement. And sometimes, acknowledgement is the first step toward real change. The following week, I opened my own law firm in Austin. Not a fancy corporate office like Morrison and Associates, but a space focused on civil rights and discrimination cases. The name on the door read, Williams and Associates, Advocacy for Social Justice. My first client was a Latina nurse who had been fired after reporting racist practices at a hospital. My second case involved an Asian engineer who was being sabotaged by colleagues who questioned his competence based on stereotypes. Familiar stories. Patterns I now recognized immediately. Using the same documentation and legal strategy techniques I had developed to defend myself, I began building cases that not only compensated individual victims but created legal precedents for systemic protection. 6 months after opening, Williams and Associates had won 14 of the 15 cases we had taken on. The 15th was still ongoing, but the evidence was overwhelming. One afternoon, while reviewing documents for a new case, my assistant announced an unexpected visitor. "Mr. Williams, there's a woman named Rebecca asking to speak with you. She says she's your ex-wife." I considered refusing. Our last conversation had been her being led away in handcuffs by federal agents. But curiosity won out over resentment. Rebecca entered my office looking noticeably different. Simple clothes, no expensive makeup, hair tied back in a practical style. She seemed smaller, more human. "Thank you for seeing me," she said, sitting cautiously in the chair opposite my desk. "What do you want, Rebecca?" "First, to apologize. Truly. Not as an attempt to lessen my guilt or get something in return. You deserved better than what I offered. I waited. Second, to tell you that you changed my life in ways you'll probably never know. Losing everything, the money, the social status, the family, forced me to see who I really was. And I didn't like it." She paused, looking around the office. "I started therapy. Not because it was required by law, but because I need to understand how I became a person capable of actively participating in the systematic humiliation of someone I loved." "Did you really love me?" I asked. "I thought I did. But now I realize I loved the idea of myself as someone progressive enough to marry a successful black man. You were my trophy of racial tolerance, not my partner." Brutal honesty. More honesty than she had shown in 5 years of marriage. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because part of my journey to becoming a better person is to fully acknowledge the damage I've caused. And because I saw the news about your office. About the cases you're winning." She stood up to leave, then turned one last time. "James, you've turned the worst experience of your life into a force for positive change. That's who you've always been. I'm sorry it took me so long to realize it." After she left, I sat in silence for a long moment. There was no reconciliation or renewal of friendship. But there was closure. And recognition that people can change, even when change comes through painful consequences. That night, I called David Chun, the investigator who had helped me expose the family's conspiracy. "David, I have a proposal. How about we formalize our partnership? Williams and Chin investigations. Discrimination cases and white-collar crimes." "Interesting," he laughed. "Are you thinking of expanding operations?" "I'm thinking about systematizing justice." A year later, Williams and Chun had become a national reference in complex discrimination cases. Our methods, meticulous documentation, precise legal strategy, and cooperation with federal agents, were being studied in law schools. But the true measure of success was not in the cases won or the money recovered for clients. It was in the families who learned to see beyond skin color. In the companies that changed discriminatory policies. In the young lawyers who specialized in civil rights after reading about our cases. Martha and her family had tried to destroy me because they believed that a successful black man was a threat to the natural order of things. They were right about one thing: I really was a threat. Not to the natural order, but to the unjust order that allowed racism to thrive through polite smiles and systematic discrimination. If this story of transformation and justice has inspired you, subscribe to the channel for more stories of people who have turned adversity into strength for positive change. Today, when I look back, I feel no anger or bitterness. I feel gratitude. Gratitude because their attempt to humiliate me revealed exactly who I was meant to be, not just a successful lawyer, but an agent of real change. In the end, they didn't destroy my life. They revealed my purpose.